Question 1. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusually high transaction volumes originating from a specific customer segment, raising a potential flag for suspicious activity. However, the system's parameters are known to be sensitive and have previously generated false positives. What is the most appropriate immediate next step for the compliance officer? Option A. Disregard the alert as a likely system error given the known sensitivity of the monitoring parameters and the absence of other immediate indicators. Option B. Initiate a detailed review of the flagged transactions, cross-referencing with customer profiles and recent legitimate business activities to identify any corroborating evidence of illicit behavior before escalating. Option C. Immediately suspend all transactions for the affected customer segment, pending a full investigation to prevent any potential financial crime. Option D. Report the anomaly to senior management as a critical security breach, requiring immediate external notification. The correct answer is B. Initiate a detailed review of the flagged transactions, cross-referencing with customer profiles and recent legitimate business activities to identify any corroborating evidence of illicit behavior before escalating. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the meticulous adherence to regulatory compliance, particularly concerning data integrity and customer protection within the financial services sector, as governed by Japanese regulations. The monitoring system's output requires careful interpretation to ensure that any identified anomalies are addressed in a manner that upholds the trust placed in Japan Post Holdings by its customers and the financial authorities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based investigation before taking any action. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible conduct expected of financial institutions under Japanese law, which emphasizes the need for robust internal controls and fair treatment of customers. By seeking clarification and additional information, the professional ensures that decisions are informed and proportionate, minimizing the risk of erroneous actions that could harm customers or lead to regulatory sanctions. This methodical process is crucial for maintaining the integrity of financial operations and customer relationships. An incorrect approach that involves immediate punitive action based solely on the initial system alert fails to acknowledge the possibility of system errors or misinterpretations. This could lead to unjustified penalties or restrictions on customer accounts, violating principles of fairness and potentially contravening consumer protection laws in Japan. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the alert due to perceived low risk, demonstrates a failure in risk management and oversight, potentially exposing the organization and its customers to significant harm and violating regulatory requirements for proactive monitoring and control. A third incorrect approach, which involves escalating the issue without proper internal validation, could lead to unnecessary resource allocation and potential panic within the organization, demonstrating a lack of sound judgment and efficient operational management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and potential implications of the observed data. This involves a systematic process of information gathering, verification, risk assessment, and consultation with relevant stakeholders or subject matter experts. The framework should prioritize actions that are compliant, ethical, and minimize harm to all parties involved, ensuring that decisions are both effective and defensible. Question 2. Assessment of an employee's understanding of data privacy obligations within Japan Post Holdings. Considering the following hypothetical situation, an employee discovers a customer's email address in a company database while performing a legitimate task. The employee then considers using this email address to send a personal invitation to a social gathering they are organizing. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant course of action according to Japanese data protection regulations and ethical professional conduct? Option A. Use the email address to send the personal invitation, assuming the customer is unlikely to object to a single social invitation. Option B. Refrain from using the email address for any purpose other than the original work-related task, and delete any personal notes related to the email address. Option C. Share the email address with a colleague who might know the customer personally and could extend the invitation on the employee's behalf. Option D. Forward the email addressed to a third-party marketing company that specializes in event invitations, believing they can handle it professionally. Correct answer is B. Refrain from using the email address for any purpose other than the original work-related task, and delete any personal notes related to the email address. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential misuse of customer information within Japan Post Holdings. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's operational needs with the stringent privacy obligations owed to its customers. Employees are privy to sensitive data, and the temptation to leverage this information for personal or unauthorized gain, even if seemingly minor, poses a significant risk to customer trust and the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to discern between legitimate business use and prohibited data exploitation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes adherence to the Act on the Protection of Personal Information, API, in Japan, and internal Japan Post Holdings policies. This involves strictly limiting access to customer data to what is necessary for performing official duties, and prohibiting any use for personal benefit or unauthorized purposes. This aligns with the API principles of purpose limitation and data minimization, ensuring that personal information is processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. It upholds the ethical duty of care towards customers and maintains the integrity of Japan Post Holding services. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves sharing customer contact details with a colleague for a non-work-related social event represents a clear violation of the API. This constitutes unauthorized disclosure and use of personal information, as it is not for the purpose for which the data was collected and without the individual's consent. Ethically, it breaches the trust placed in Japan Post Holdings by its customers. An approach that involves using customer addresses to send unsolicited marketing materials for a personal side business is also a serious regulatory and ethical failure. This is a direct contravention of the API provisions against secondary use of personal data without consent and for purposes unrelated to the original collection. It exploits customer data for personal financial gain, undermining the fundamental principles of data protection. An approach that involves casually discussing customer transaction details with friends during a lunch break, even if no names are explicitly mentioned, is problematic. While not a direct disclosure of identifiable information, it risks revealing sensitive details about individuals' financial activities, potentially leading to their identification through context. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in safeguarding confidential information and a disregard for the spirit of privacy protection mandated by the API. Professional reasoning. Professionals in roles at Japan Post Holdings must adopt a proactive and principled approach to data handling. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding and internalizing the requirements of the API and all relevant internal policies. 2. Practicing data minimization, accessing and using only the information strictly necessary for their assigned tasks. 3. Exercising caution and seeking clarification whenever there is any doubt about the appropriateness of data use. 4. Prioritizing customer privacy and trust above any perceived personal or operational convenience. 5. Reporting any suspected breaches or inappropriate data handling to the appropriate internal channels. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that companies often face a dilemma when introducing innovative new services that leverage existing infrastructure. For Japan Post Holdings, considering a new digital remittance service that utilizes its extensive physical branch network for cash-to-digital conversions, what is the most prudent and compliant approach to ensure successful and lawful market entry, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework governing postal and financial services in Japan? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and legal compliance review, engaging legal and compliance departments to ensure the new service aligns with the Postal Services Act and relevant financial regulations before any public launch. Option B. Delegate the entire compliance responsibility for the new service to the marketing team, trusting their understanding of customer needs to guide regulatory adherence. Option C. Prioritize rapid market penetration and customer acquisition, addressing any potential compliance issues reactively after the service has gained traction. Option D. Proceed with the service launch based on market demand and competitive analysis, assuming that general business laws will adequately cover the new offering. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and legal compliance review, engaging legal and compliance departments to ensure the new service aligns with the Postal Services Act and relevant financial regulations before any public launch. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's strategic growth objectives and the need to maintain robust internal controls and ethical conduct. Japan Post Holdings, as a publicly recognized entity, operates under strict regulatory oversight and public trust, navigating the introduction of new services while ensuring compliance with the Postal Services Act and related financial regulations requires careful judgment to avoid potential legal repercussions, reputational damage, and erosion of customer confidence. The pressure to innovate and expand market share must be balanced against the imperative of responsible corporate behavior. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which prioritizes a thorough risk assessment and compliance review before launching new services, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles embedded within the Postal Services Act and relevant financial services regulations in Japan. Specifically, it demonstrates adherence to the duty of care required of regulated entities to ensure that new business activities do not contravene existing laws, compromise customer data security, or introduce systemic risks. Proactive identification and mitigation of potential compliance gaps before market entry are crucial for maintaining operational integrity and regulatory standing. This approach reflects a commitment to responsible business development and upholds the public trust placed in Japan Post Holdings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the launch based solely on market demand and competitive pressure, without a formal compliance review. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the Postal Services Act, which mandates that all operations be conducted in a manner that ensures public safety, security, and the integrity of postal services. Such an approach risks introducing services that may inadvertently violate privacy laws, data protection regulations, or financial conduct rules, leading to penalties, legal action, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to delegate the entire compliance responsibility to the marketing department without adequate oversight from legal and compliance teams. This represents a failure in corporate governance and risk management. While marketing drives innovation, compliance is a cross-functional responsibility. This delegation can lead to a superficial understanding of regulatory requirements and a lack of robust internal controls, as marketing teams may not possess the specialized knowledge to identify all potential legal and ethical pitfalls. This can result in unintentional noncompliance, exposing the company to significant risks. A third incorrect approach is to assume that existing general business regulations are sufficient without specific consideration for the unique operational and regulatory landscape of postal and related financial services. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to appreciate the specific mandates of the Postal Services Act and any associated financial services legislation. Each regulated sector has its own nuances and specific compliance obligations. Ignoring these can lead to overlooking critical requirements related to service delivery standards, consumer protection, and financial transaction integrity, thereby creating a substantial compliance deficit. Professional reasoning. Professionals in such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the strategic objective. This should be immediately followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential legal, regulatory, operational, and reputational risks associated with the proposed new service. A critical step is to engage relevant internal stakeholders, including legal, compliance, risk management, and operational departments, to conduct a thorough review against all applicable Japanese laws and regulations, particularly the Postal Services Act and any relevant financial services legislation. The decision to proceed should be contingent upon the successful mitigation of identified risks and the establishment of robust compliance frameworks. Continuous monitoring and post-launch review are also essential to ensure ongoing adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of potential customers are actively engaged on emerging social media platforms. Japan Post Holdings is considering a new marketing initiative to leverage these platforms for promoting its financial products and services. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical considerations for a financial institution operating in Japan? Option A. Engage popular social media influencers to promote financial products, assuming their content will naturally resonate with a broad audience without requiring explicit regulatory review of their endorsements. Option B. Immediately launch targeted advertising campaigns on popular social media platforms, focusing on visually appealing content and limited-time offers to maximize immediate customer interest. Option C. Develop a comprehensive social media marketing strategy that includes clear disclaimers, accurate product information, and a robust process for obtaining customer consent for data usage, all reviewed and approved by the legal and compliance departments prior to launch. Option D. Utilize customer data collected from existing services to create personalized social media ads, without explicitly informing customers about this new use of their data on external platforms. The correct answer is C. Develop a comprehensive social media marketing strategy that includes clear disclaimers, accurate product information, and a robust process for obtaining customer consent for data usage, all reviewed and approved by the legal and compliance departments prior to launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to leverage emerging digital platforms for customer engagement and the stringent regulatory environment governing financial services in Japan, particularly concerning customer data privacy and fair marketing practices. Japan Post Holdings, as a publicly listed entity with significant public trust, must navigate these complexities with utmost diligence. The core challenge lies in balancing innovation with compliance, ensuring that any new marketing strategy adheres strictly to the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act (FIA) and relevant consumer protection guidelines issued by bodies like the Financial Services Agency (FSA). The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and adherence to the regulatory framework before implementing any new strategy. This involves a comprehensive review of FIA provisions related to advertising and solicitation, particularly those concerning the accuracy of information, prevention of misleading statements, and the protection of customer interests. It also aligns with ethical principles of transparency and fairness, ensuring that potential customers are not subjected to undue pressure or misrepresentation. Proactive engagement with legal and compliance departments ensures that the proposed strategy is vetted against current regulations and industry best practices, mitigating potential legal and reputational risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential for increased customer acquisition through social media without a prior regulatory review demonstrates a failure to uphold professional duty of care and compliance. This could lead to violations of FIA advertising rules, such as Article 38, which prohibits false or misleading representations. Furthermore, it risks breaching the Act on the Protection of Personal Information (EPI), especially regarding the collection, use, and disclosure of customer data on third-party platforms. Another incorrect approach that relies on informal endorsements without verifying their compliance with disclosure requirements would also be problematic, potentially violating FIA rules on inducements and fair advertising. Such actions could result in regulatory sanctions, fines, and significant damage to Japan Post Holdings' reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying the objective, e.g., enhanced customer engagement, followed by an assessment of potential regulatory implications. Consulting with internal legal and compliance experts is paramount. If the proposed strategy involves new technologies or platforms, a thorough due diligence process should be conducted to understand the specific regulatory requirements and potential pitfalls. Finally, any strategy should be piloted or implemented with ongoing monitoring and evaluation to ensure continued compliance and effectiveness. Question 5. To address the challenge of ensuring fair and transparent vendor selection when a Japan Post Holdings employee has a close personal relationship with a representative of a potential vendor, what is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Proceed with the vendor evaluation and recommendation as usual, assuming personal impartiality will be maintained and that the relationship will not influence the decision. Option B. Subtly advocate for the vendor during the evaluation process, believing the personal relationship will ensure a mutually beneficial outcome for both parties. Option C. Proactively disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate internal authority and recuse oneself from all aspects of the vendor evaluation and selection process concerning that vendor. Option D. Ignore the personal relationship, as it is a private matter and should not interfere with professional duties or the objective assessment of vendor capabilities. The correct answer is C. Proactively disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate internal authority and recuse oneself from all aspects of the vendor evaluation and selection process concerning that vendor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the ethical handling of potential conflicts of interest within Japan Post Holdings. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient business operations and leveraging external expertise with the imperative to maintain public trust and adhere to strict ethical guidelines designed to prevent undue influence or preferential treatment. The employee's close personal relationship with the vendor's representative creates a perception of bias, even if no actual impropriety occurred. This requires careful judgment to ensure that all decisions are demonstrably fair, transparent, and in the best interest of Japan Post Holdings and its stakeholders, rather than influenced by personal connections. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal relationship to the relevant internal authority, e.g., supervisor, compliance department, and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes directly involving the vendor. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees in organizations like Japan Post Holdings. Such disclosure and recusal demonstrate integrity, uphold transparency, and prevent any appearance of impropriety. This approach safeguards Japan Post Holdings from potential regulatory scrutiny, reputational damage, and ensures that vendor selection is based solely on merit and objective criteria, as mandated by internal policies and general ethical business practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the vendor evaluation and recommendation without disclosing the personal relationship. This is a significant ethical failure because it conceals a potential conflict of interest. It violates the principle of transparency and could lead to a perception or reality of preferential treatment, undermining the fairness of the procurement process. This could also contravene specific internal policies of Japan Post Holdings regarding conflicts of interest and potentially lead to disciplinary action or legal repercussions if discovered. Another incorrect approach is to subtly steer the evaluation towards the vendor due to the personal relationship, even without explicit disclosure. This is a form of unethical influence and a breach of fiduciary duty. It prioritizes personal connection over the objective best interests of Japan Post Holdings, potentially resulting in suboptimal outcomes, increased costs, or inferior quality of services. This directly violates the ethical obligation to act with integrity and impartiality in all business dealings. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the personal relationship and assume it will not influence judgment. While the employee might genuinely believe they can remain impartial, the mere existence of a close personal tie creates an inherent risk of unconscious bias. Failing to acknowledge and manage this risk is a failure of professional responsibility. It leaves the organization vulnerable to accusations of favoritism and erodes trust in the integrity of its operations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to organizational policies. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest, both actual and perceived. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and ethical guidelines. 3. Proactively disclosing any identified conflicts to the appropriate authority. 4. Recusing oneself from any decision-making processes where a conflict exists. 5. Seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance officers when in doubt. This systematic approach ensures that personal relationships do not compromise professional judgment or the integrity of organizational processes. Question 6. Cost-benefit analysis shows that launching a new digital remittance service could significantly increase revenue and market share for Japan Post Holdings, but it also requires substantial upfront investment in technology and compliance with evolving financial regulations. Which approach best balances potential gains with responsible corporate conduct? Option A. Implement the service with minimal initial regulatory checks to gain a first-mover advantage, assuming that any compliance issues can be resolved through retrospective adjustments and fines. Option B. Delay the launch indefinitely due to the complexity of regulatory requirements, prioritizing existing service stability over potential new revenue streams. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, including a detailed analysis of all applicable Japanese financial and data privacy regulations, and develop a robust compliance framework before committing to the investment. Option D. Proceed with the launch, focusing primarily on the projected revenue increase and deferring detailed regulatory compliance planning until after the service is operational. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the launch, focusing primarily on the projected revenue increase and deferring detailed regulatory compliance planning until after the service is operational. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in corporate strategy, balancing the potential for innovation and market expansion with the inherent risks and regulatory compliance requirements. Japan Post Holdings, as a large, established entity with significant public trust, must navigate this delicate balance carefully. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the long-term strategic value of a new service against its immediate costs and potential regulatory hurdles, ensuring that any decision aligns with the company's fiduciary duties and the public interest it serves. The correct approach emphasizes a comprehensive, forward-looking assessment that integrates financial projections with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape specific to Japan's postal and financial services sectors. This involves not just quantifying immediate costs and benefits, but also evaluating the strategic fit, potential for future growth, and the robustness of the proposed compliance framework. Adhering to the relevant laws and guidelines governing postal services, financial products, and data privacy in Japan is paramount. This ensures that the company operates ethically, maintains customer trust, and avoids legal repercussions, which would ultimately outweigh any short-term financial gains. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term cost savings or immediate revenue generation without adequately considering the long-term implications or regulatory compliance. For instance, a decision based solely on the lowest initial investment might overlook the significant costs associated with future regulatory adjustments or potential fines for non-compliance. Another failure would be to underestimate the complexity of integrating a new service with existing infrastructure and customer bases, leading to operational inefficiencies and reputational damage. Furthermore, neglecting to consult with legal and compliance departments early in the process represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it bypasses essential checks and balances designed to protect the company and its stakeholders. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the strategic objectives. This is followed by a detailed risk assessment, including regulatory, operational, and market risks. A thorough cost-benefit analysis should then be conducted, incorporating both tangible and intangible factors, and projecting outcomes over a realistic time frame. Crucially, this analysis must be informed by expert input from legal, compliance, and operational teams. The final decision should be based on a holistic evaluation that prioritizes long-term sustainability, regulatory adherence, and alignment with the company's mission and values, rather than solely on immediate financial metrics. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood and high impact rating for a control deficiency in the customer onboarding process for new postal savings accounts. Which of the following actions best represents a compliant and professionally responsible response for Japan Post Holdings? Option A. Implement the least expensive software patch available that appears to address the identified deficiency, without a thorough assessment of its long-term effectiveness or potential side effects. Option B. Immediately implement a temporary manual workaround to expedite customer onboarding while a permanent solution is investigated, assuming the risk is unlikely to materialize in the short term. Option C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the deficiency, assess its potential impact on customer data security and regulatory compliance, and develop a phased implementation plan for enhanced controls, including staff training and system updates, with ongoing monitoring. Option D. Reclassify the risk as low impact based on anecdotal evidence from customer service representatives, and defer any significant control enhancements until the next scheduled system review. Correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the deficiency, assess its potential impact on customer data security and regulatory compliance, and develop a phased implementation plan for enhanced controls, including staff training and system updates, with ongoing monitoring. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and robust risk management, particularly within the context of Japan Post Holdings' diverse operations. The risk matrix, a standard tool for visualizing and prioritizing risks, highlights a potential gap in the current controls for a specific operational area. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate and compliant response to this identified risk, balancing the need for timely action with the procedural requirements and ethical considerations mandated by Japanese financial regulations and corporate governance principles. The pressure to maintain service levels and profitability can create a temptation to adopt expedient but potentially non-compliant solutions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, multi-stage process that aligns with the principles of sound corporate governance and regulatory compliance in Japan. This begins with a detailed investigation to understand the root cause of the identified risk. Following this, comprehensive assessment of the impact and likelihood of the risk materializing is crucial, using the risk matrix as a guide, but not as a sole determinant. The subsequent development of mitigation strategies must be informed by regulatory requirements, such as those pertaining to customer protection, data privacy, and financial integrity, as overseen by bodies like the Financial Services Agency, FSA, and relevant postal service regulations. Implementing these strategies requires clear communication, resource allocation, and ongoing monitoring. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are evidence-based, compliant with Japanese law and industry best practices, and demonstrably aimed at protecting the company and its stakeholders. It reflects a commitment to proactive risk management, a cornerstone of responsible business operations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing a superficial control measure without fully understanding the underlying issue. This fails to address the root cause of the risk, potentially leading to its recurrence or the emergence of new, unforeseen risks. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the principle of effective risk management, which could be viewed as a breach of fiduciary duty to stakeholders. From a regulatory standpoint, it may violate requirements for adequate internal controls and risk mitigation frameworks. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the identified risk as minor based on a subjective interpretation of the risk matrix, without a formal reassessment or consultation. This ignores the potential for even low-probability, high-impact events to cause significant damage. It represents a failure to adhere to established risk assessment methodologies and could be seen as negligent, potentially contravening regulatory expectations for a comprehensive and objective risk evaluation process. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize cost-cutting over effective risk mitigation by choosing the cheapest, rather than the most effective, control. This demonstrates a misaligned set of priorities, where financial expediency trumps the imperative of robust risk management and regulatory compliance. Such a decision could lead to inadequate controls, increasing the likelihood of a risk event and its associated financial and reputational damage, thereby failing to meet the standards expected by regulators and the public. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must clearly define the problem and the scope of the risk identified. Second, they should gather all relevant information, including data from the risk matrix, operational reports, and regulatory guidelines. Third, they must analyze the root causes and potential impacts of the risk. Fourth, they should brainstorm and evaluate potential mitigation strategies, considering their effectiveness, cost, and regulatory compliance. Fifth, they should select the most appropriate strategy based on a comprehensive assessment, ensuring it aligns with the company's risk appetite and legal obligations. Finally, they must implement the chosen strategy, monitor its effectiveness, and be prepared to adapt as necessary. This systematic and evidence-based approach ensures that decisions are sound, ethical, and compliant. Question 8. Market research demonstrates a growing consumer demand for integrated digital platforms that offer a seamless experience for sending and receiving packages, including features like real-time tracking, digital postage purchase, and automated customs declarations. Japan Post Holdings is considering developing a proprietary digital service to meet this demand. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework governing Japan Post Holdings operations and ensures compliance? Option A. Seek legal counsel from international experts in digital logistics to ensure the service meets global best practices, as Japanese regulations may not be sufficiently advanced for this type of offering. Option B. Proceed with the service development based on its market potential, deferring any formal regulatory review until after the service has been established and is generating revenue. Option C. Launch the digital service immediately to capture market share, assuming that its innovative nature and digital format exempt it from traditional postal service regulations. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed digital service against the Postal Services Act and relevant Japanese regulations to determine licensing, notification, and operational requirements, prioritizing adherence to consumer protection and data privacy laws. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed digital service against the Postal Services Act and relevant Japanese regulations to determine licensing, notification, and operational requirements, prioritizing adherence to consumer protection and data privacy laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to leverage new market trends for competitive advantage and the imperative to adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing Japan Post Holdings. The pressure to innovate and adapt quickly can sometimes lead to overlooking or misinterpreting compliance requirements, especially when dealing with emerging digital services. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed digital service against the specific provisions of the Postal Services Act and related regulations in Japan. This includes assessing whether the service falls within the scope of designated postal services, if it requires specific licensing or notification, and if it adheres to consumer protection and data privacy mandates. This approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes legal compliance and risk mitigation, ensuring that Japan Post Holdings operates within its authorized framework and avoids potential penalties or reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible business conduct and upholds the trust placed in the organization by the public and regulators. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with the digital service based solely on its perceived market demand and potential profitability without a formal regulatory assessment. This fails to acknowledge the legal limitations and oversight placed upon postal service providers in Japan. It represents a significant regulatory failure by potentially engaging in activities outside the company's authorized scope or without necessary approvals, which could lead to fines, operational disruptions, and legal challenges. Ethically, it undermines the principle of operating with integrity and transparency. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the service is digital, it is exempt from postal regulations. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of how regulatory frameworks adapt to technological advancements. Many laws, including those governing postal services, are designed to be technology neutral or are updated to encompass new delivery mechanisms. This approach risks violating the spirit and letter of the law, leading to similar consequences as the first incorrect approach. A third incorrect approach would be to seek external legal advice from a jurisdiction other than Japan. This is a critical failure because the regulatory framework for Japan Post Holdings is exclusively governed by Japanese law. Relying on advice from other jurisdictions would be irrelevant and potentially misleading, leading to incorrect compliance strategies and significant legal exposure within Japan. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, clearly define the proposed service and its intended operations. Second, identify all relevant Japanese laws and regulations, particularly the Postal Services Act and any associated ministerial ordinances or guidelines. Third, conduct a detailed compliance assessment, mapping the service's features and operations against each regulatory requirement. Fourth, consult with internal legal and compliance departments, and if necessary, engage Japanese legal counsel specializing in postal and telecommunications law. Finally, document the entire assessment process and the rationale for the decision, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 9. Consider a scenario where Japan Post Holdings is contemplating a significant strategic restructuring involving the potential divestment of a major subsidiary. This decision, if finalized, would undoubtedly have a material impact on the company's financial performance and future direction. The internal discussions are ongoing, and while a preliminary consensus is forming, formal board approval is still pending. Head of Investor Relations is aware of the potential market sensitivity and the need for careful communication. What is the most appropriate course of action for the head of Investor Relations to ensure compliance with Japanese regulatory frameworks and ethical best practices regarding disclosure? Option A. Leak preliminary information about the potential restructuring to a trusted financial journalist to generate early media coverage and manage public perception. Option B. Initiate immediate, confidential briefings with key institutional investors and financial analysts to gauge their reactions and prepare them for the potential announcement. Option C. Advise senior management to delay any external communication until the restructuring is fully approved and all operational details are finalized, to avoid premature speculation. Option D. Prepare a comprehensive press release and investor presentation detailing the proposed restructuring, ready for immediate dissemination to all shareholders, employees, and the public once internal approvals are secured. The correct answer is B. Initiate immediate, confidential briefings with key institutional investors and financial analysts to gauge their reactions and prepare them for the potential announcement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to corporate governance and stakeholder communication within the context of Japan Post Holdings. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for transparency with the potential for market sensitivity of information, particularly when dealing with a significant strategic shift that could impact share price and public perception. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all stakeholders are informed appropriately and ethically, adhering to the principles of fair disclosure and preventing insider trading. The correct approach emphasizes proactive and comprehensive communication to all relevant stakeholders simultaneously, including shareholders, employees, and the public, through official channels. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectations in Japan concerning timely and accurate disclosure of material information. By providing a clear and consistent message through established communication protocols, Japan Post Holdings demonstrates a commitment to transparency and fairness, mitigating the risk of information asymmetry and potential market manipulation. This approach respects the rights of all stakeholders to access information that may affect their interests. An incorrect approach that prioritizes informing only a select group of external investors before public announcement would constitute a serious breach of disclosure regulations and ethical standards. This creates an unfair advantage for those informed early, potentially leading to insider trading and undermining market integrity. Such selective disclosure is strictly prohibited under Japanese financial regulations, designed to ensure a level playing field for all investors. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying the announcement until all internal approvals are finalized without any interim communication, risks creating a vacuum of information. This can lead to speculation, rumors, and a loss of confidence among stakeholders who may perceive the lack of communication as evasiveness or a lack of preparedness. While internal processes are important, a complete lack of external communication regarding a significant strategic shift can be detrimental to stakeholder relations and market stability. Finally, an approach that relies solely on informal communication channels or leaks to the media is highly unprofessional and carries significant regulatory and reputational risks. This bypasses official disclosure mechanisms, making it difficult to control the narrative and ensure accuracy. It also opens the door to misinterpretations and can be seen as a deliberate attempt to circumvent disclosure obligations, leading to regulatory penalties and severe damage to the company's credibility. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's disclosure policies, relevant Japanese financial laws and regulations, such as the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act, and ethical guidelines for corporate communication. A cross-functional team, including legal, investor relations, and corporate communications, should be convened to assess the materiality of the information, determine the appropriate timing and method of disclosure, and ensure a consistent message is delivered to all stakeholders simultaneously. The priority must always be fair and equitable access to material information. Question 10. The investigation demonstrates that a draft strategic restructuring plan for Japan Post Holdings containing significant details about potential divestitures and new service offerings, has been circulated internally among a broad range of department heads for feedback. Given the potential market sensitivity of this information, what is the most appropriate next step to ensure compliance with Japanese financial regulations and maintain market integrity? Option A. Disseminate the draft plan widely across the company via the internal network to solicit broad input and foster transparency among all employees. Option B. Implement a controlled internal review process with strict confidentiality agreements for all involved, followed by a formal assessment of materiality to determine the necessity and timing of public disclosure. Option C. Proceed with the strategic implementation based on the feedback received, assuming that internal planning documents do not require external regulatory scrutiny until a final decision is made. Option D. Immediately submit the draft plan to the relevant regulatory bodies for review and approval before any further internal discussion or external communication. Correct answer is D. Immediately submit the draft plan to the relevant regulatory bodies for review and approval before any further internal discussion or external communication. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for efficient information dissemination within Japan Post Holdings and the regulatory imperative to ensure accuracy and prevent market manipulation. The rapid release of potentially sensitive information, even if intended for internal strategic planning, carries a significant risk of premature disclosure, which could unfairly advantage certain market participants or create undue market volatility. Navigating this requires a nuanced understanding of disclosure obligations and internal control procedures. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a structured and controlled process for disseminating information. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and market integrity, which are fundamental to the regulatory framework governing listed companies in Japan. By requiring a formal review and approval process, Japan Post Holdings ensures that any information released externally is accurate, complete, and compliant with relevant disclosure rules. This proactive measure mitigates the risk of accidental leaks or selective disclosure, thereby upholding investor confidence and maintaining a level playing field for all market participants. This approach is best professional practice as it prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct, safeguarding the company's reputation and avoiding potential legal repercussions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately sharing the draft strategy document with all employees via the company-wide intranet. This action represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It constitutes a breach of confidentiality and a potential violation of insider trading regulations if the information is deemed material and non-public. The uncontrolled dissemination bypasses necessary checks and balances, increasing the likelihood of information leakage to external parties before official disclosure. Another incorrect approach is to only inform a select group of senior executives and then proceed with implementation without any external communication plan. While this limits immediate risk of broad leakage, it fails to address the potential need for public disclosure if the strategy has material implications for the company's financial performance or business operations. This selective communication can lead to information asymmetry and is ethically questionable if it allows a privileged few to act on non-public information. A third incorrect approach is to assume that since the information is for internal planning, no external regulatory considerations apply. This is a critical misunderstanding of disclosure obligations. Even internal strategic documents can contain material non-public information that, if leaked, could have significant market impact. The regulatory framework requires companies to manage such information diligently to prevent its misuse. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a risk-based approach. First, assess the materiality of the information contained within the draft strategy. If it is material and non-public, then a formal disclosure process must be initiated, adhering to the rules of the Tokyo Stock Exchange and the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act. This involves consultation with legal and compliance departments to determine the appropriate timing and method of disclosure. Internal communication should be strictly controlled, limited to those with a legitimate need to know, and accompanied by clear directives on confidentiality. A robust internal control system for managing sensitive information is paramount. Question 11. Upon reviewing a client's portfolio, You notice a significant holding in a company that is rumored to be the subject of a major, non-public acquisition by a competitor. Your client expresses concern about the potential impact of this rumor on their investment and asks for your immediate advice on whether to sell their shares. You have no direct knowledge of the acquisition beyond the market rumor. Option A. Advise the client to sell their shares immediately, citing the potential for significant price appreciation if the acquisition proceeds, and suggest they consider reinvesting in a more stable sector. Option B. Inform the client that you cannot provide specific advice based on market rumors due to regulatory restrictions and ethical obligations regarding non-public information, and suggest they monitor publicly available news and analyst reports for official announcements. Option C. Recommend that the client hold their shares, as market rumors are often unfounded and could lead to unnecessary transaction costs. Option D. Discreetly contact your professional network within the acquiring company to ascertain the veracity of the rumor before advising the client. The correct answer is A. Advise the client to sell their shares immediately, citing the potential for significant price appreciation if the acquisition proceeds, and suggest they consider reinvesting in a more stable sector. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation of maintaining client confidentiality and the potential for conflicts of interest within a financial advisory context, specifically as it relates to Japan Post Holdings' operations and regulatory environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to provide comprehensive advice to a client with the imperative to avoid using or disclosing non-public information obtained through professional dealings. Adherence to the principles of integrity and professional conduct, as expected within the Japanese financial services sector, is paramount. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's immediate needs and financial well-being, while strictly adhering to confidentiality agreements and regulatory guidelines. This involves seeking information through legitimate, publicly available channels or directly from the client, thereby avoiding any appearance or actual breach of trust or insider trading regulations. This aligns with the ethical framework that governs financial professionals in Japan, emphasizing client interests and the integrity of the market. An incorrect approach that involves leveraging knowledge of an impending, non-public corporate action for personal gain or to influence client decisions would constitute a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This would violate principles of fair dealing and could be construed as insider trading, which is strictly prohibited under Japanese financial regulations. Another incorrect approach, such as disclosing the confidential information to the client without proper authorization or context, would breach confidentiality obligations owed to the source of the information and could lead to legal repercussions and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the client's request due to the sensitive nature of the information, without offering alternative, compliant methods of assistance, fails to uphold the professional duty to serve the client to the best of one's ability within ethical and legal boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the ethical and regulatory boundaries of the situation. This involves a clear understanding of confidentiality obligations, potential conflicts of interest, and applicable laws. The next step is to assess the client's request against these boundaries. If the request, as presented, cannot be fulfilled ethically or legally, the professional must then explore alternative, compliant methods to address the client's underlying needs. This might involve seeking clarification, suggesting publicly available research, or advising the client on how to obtain the information through appropriate channels. Transparency with the client about what can and cannot be done, and why, is crucial. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates a high volume of alerts related to minor procedural deviations in mail handling processes across various regional offices. These deviations, while technically non-compliant with specific subclauses of the Postal Services Act, do not appear to have resulted in any actual service disruptions or financial losses. The compliance team is considering how to best address these alerts. Option A. Conduct a targeted review of the flagged deviations to assess their actual impact and risk, and only escalate those with potential for significant consequences for further investigation and remediation. Option B. Temporarily disable the monitoring system for procedural deviations until a more sophisticated system can be implemented to reduce the current alert volume. Option C. Automatically escalate all flagged deviations to senior management for immediate disciplinary action to reinforce the importance of strict adherence to all regulations. Option D. Implement a mandatory retraining program for all staff in affected offices, focusing on the specific subclauses flagged by the system, and require individual sign-offs confirming understanding. The correct answer is D. Implement a mandatory retraining program for all staff in affected offices, focusing on the specific subclauses flagged by the system, and require individual sign-offs confirming understanding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the efficiency of automated monitoring with the nuanced understanding of human behavior and intent, particularly within the context of Japan Post Holdings' regulatory obligations. The core difficulty lies in distinguishing between genuine compliance breaches and minor, unintentional deviations that do not pose a significant risk. Overly aggressive automated flagging can lead to wasted resources and employee distrust, while insufficient flagging can result in missed compliance failures. Careful judgment is required to calibrate the system and its human oversight effectively. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it acknowledges the limitations of purely automated systems and integrates human expertise for context and judgment. This aligns with the principles of robust internal control frameworks, which necessitate both technological solutions and human oversight to ensure comprehensive regulatory compliance. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to a risk-based approach, focusing resources on significant deviations while allowing for the efficient handling of minor issues. This proactive and balanced strategy is crucial for maintaining the integrity of Japan Post Holdings operations and adhering to the spirit, not just the letter, of relevant Japanese postal and financial regulations. An incorrect approach that relies solely on automated alerts without human review fails to account for the possibility of false positives or minor, non-material deviations. This can lead to unnecessary investigations, damage employee morale, and misallocate compliance resources, potentially diverting attention from more serious issues. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of trust in employees and an over-reliance on technology, which can be seen as a failure to implement a proportionate and effective compliance program. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring alerts that do not immediately appear to be severe, risks overlooking subtle but potentially systemic compliance issues. This passive stance can lead to a gradual erosion of compliance standards and may violate regulatory expectations for proactive monitoring and remediation. It represents a failure to exercise due diligence and a potential breach of duty of care in ensuring adherence to established rules and guidelines. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a continuous cycle of monitoring, analysis, and refinement. This includes 1. Establishing clear thresholds for automated alerts based on risk assessment. 2. Implementing a tiered review process where alerts are initially assessed by trained compliance personnel. 3. Developing protocols for escalating significant alerts for further investigation. And 4. Regularly reviewing the effectiveness of the monitoring system and adjusting its parameters based on observed patterns and emerging risks. This iterative approach ensures that the monitoring system remains relevant, efficient, and effective in safeguarding regulatory compliance. Question 13. Examination of the data shows that Japan Post Holdings is considering a new initiative to leverage customer transaction data for internal strategic analysis. To facilitate this, a proposal has been made to share anonymized data with a third-party analytics firm. The proposed anonymization method involves removing direct identifiers such as names and addresses, but retains detailed transaction histories. Given the regulatory framework governing financial institutions in Japan, particularly the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act (FIA), and its associated guidelines on data handling and privacy, what is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance? Option A. Delay the initiative until a comprehensive review of all potential data privacy implications can be completed, even if this significantly postpones the strategic analysis. Option B. Implement a robust anonymization process that goes beyond simple de-identification, ensuring that the data is rendered irreversibly anonymous in accordance with FIA guidelines, and obtain explicit internal legal and compliance approval before sharing. Option C. Share the data with the analytics firm, assuming that their internal data protection protocols are sufficient to safeguard the information. Option D. Proceed with sharing the data after removing only direct personal identifiers, as this is generally understood to constitute anonymization for analytical purposes. The correct answer is B. Implement a robust anonymization process that goes beyond simple de-identification, ensuring that the data is rendered irreversibly anonymous in accordance with FIA guidelines, and obtain explicit internal legal and compliance approval before sharing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance within the Japanese financial services sector, specifically as it pertains to Japan Post Holdings. The need to process a high volume of customer transactions, while simultaneously ensuring adherence to the Financial Instruments and Exchange Act FIA and related guidelines necessitates a robust and well-understood compliance framework. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough understanding and application of the FIA provisions concerning customer information protection and transaction record keeping. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of regulatory breaches, protects customer trust, and upholds the integrity of Japan Post Holdings operations. Adhering to these regulations is not merely a legal obligation, but a fundamental ethical responsibility to safeguard sensitive data and ensure fair dealing. An incorrect approach that overlooks the detailed requirements for data anonymization before sharing for analytical purposes would constitute a significant regulatory failure. This could lead to violations of the FIA privacy provisions, resulting in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer confidence. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on internal, non-validated data anonymization techniques without explicit regulatory guidance or independent verification, risks noncompliance. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to meet the high standards expected by regulators. A third incorrect approach, which involves delaying the implementation of anonymization protocols due to perceived operational burdens, directly contravenes the spirit and letter of regulatory mandates designed to protect data privacy, thereby creating an unacceptable level of risk. Professionals in this context should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific regulatory obligations applicable to the task at hand, in this case, data handling and sharing under the FIA. This involves consulting official guidance from the Financial Services Agency, FSA, and relevant industry best practices. The next step is to assess the proposed operational activities against these requirements, identifying potential areas of noncompliance. Solutions should then be developed that demonstrably meet regulatory standards, prioritizing data protection and privacy. Finally, ongoing monitoring and periodic review of compliance procedures are essential to adapt to evolving regulations and operational changes. Question 14. Performance analysis shows a recent increase in minor delivery delays across several key urban hubs. Considering the interconnected nature of Japan Post Holdings' logistics network, which of the following approaches best identifies potential systemic risks that could lead to more significant disruptions? Option A. An assessment that evaluates each operational segment in isolation, focusing on its individual performance metrics without considering its impact on or from other parts of the logistics chain. Option B. A focused investigation into the specific causes of the recent minor delays, such as driver availability or vehicle maintenance schedules, to address these immediate issues. Option C. A comprehensive review of all operational processes, from initial sorting to final delivery, identifying critical dependencies and potential failure points within each stage, and assessing the impact of these failures on the overall network. Option D. An analysis primarily attributing potential future disruptions to unpredictable external events like severe weather patterns or sudden geopolitical shifts. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive review of all operational processes, from initial sorting to final delivery, identifying critical dependencies and potential failure points within each stage, and assessing the impact of these failures on the overall network. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in risk assessment by requiring the identification of potential operational disruption within Japan Post Holdings' logistics network. The challenge lies in moving beyond superficial observations to a deeper understanding of interconnected systems and the cascading effects of failures. A thorough risk assessment demands foresight, an understanding of critical dependencies, and the ability to anticipate both internal and external threats. The professional must exercise sound judgment to prioritize risks based on their potential impact and likelihood, ensuring that mitigation efforts are focused and effective, aligning with the operational resilience expected of a critical infrastructure provider like Japan Post Holdings. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of potential failure points within the logistics network, considering factors such as infrastructure integrity, technological dependencies, human error, and external environmental influences. This aligns with the principles of robust risk management frameworks, which emphasize proactive identification and assessment of threats to operational continuity. For Japan Post Holdings, this would involve referencing internal operational guidelines and relevant Japanese regulations concerning the stability and security of essential postal services. The focus is on understanding the root causes of potential disruptions and their downstream consequences, enabling the development of targeted mitigation strategies. This approach is best professional practice as it ensures that resources are allocated to address the most significant risks, thereby safeguarding service delivery and maintaining public trust, which are paramount for a public service institution. Incorrect approach is analysis, focusing solely on the most visible or recent incidents without a broader systemic analysis is an incorrect approach. This overlooks potential, less obvious but equally damaging risks, and fails to address underlying vulnerabilities. It represents a reactive rather than proactive stance, which is contrary to best practices in risk management, and potentially violates regulatory expectations for continuous improvement and comprehensive risk oversight. Attributing all potential failures to external factors, such as natural disasters, without considering internal operational weaknesses or the company's capacity to respond, is also an incorrect approach. While external events are a significant risk, a comprehensive assessment must also evaluate internal controls, preparedness, and resilience. This narrow focus can lead to underestimation of risks that are within the organization's control and for which mitigation strategies can be implemented. It may also contravene any Japanese legal or regulatory requirements that mandate internal risk management and operational resilience planning. Ignoring the interconnectedness of different operational segments, such as the impact of a delay in one sorting facility on subsequent delivery routes, is another incorrect approach. This siloed thinking fails to capture the full scope of potential disruptions and their cascading effects. A holistic view is essential for effective risk assessment, as a failure in one area can trigger failures in others, amplifying the overall impact. This oversight can lead to inadequate contingency planning and a failure to meet service-level agreements, potentially incurring regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured risk assessment methodology that begins with defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential hazards and threats relevant to Japan Post Holdings operations, analyzing the likelihood and impact of these risks, and then evaluating existing controls. This process should be iterative and informed by internal data, industry best practices, and relevant Japanese regulatory guidance on operational risk and business continuity. The decision-making process should prioritize risks based on their potential severity and likelihood, leading to the development of appropriate mitigation, transfer, acceptance, or avoidance strategies. Continuous monitoring and review are crucial to adapt to evolving risk landscapes. Question 15. Market research demonstrates a significant opportunity for Japan Post Holdings to introduce a new digital service that leverages its extensive customer network. Before proceeding with full-scale development and launch, what is the most prudent approach to ensure the service aligns with regulatory requirements and operational integrity? Option A. Focus primarily on the potential revenue streams and market share gains, deferring detailed risk analysis until after the service has been launched and initial customer feedback is received. Option B. Implement the service with minimal upfront risk assessment, relying on the existing robust operational framework of Japan Post Holdings to inherently manage any unforeseen issues. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates all potential operational, financial, compliance, and reputational risks and develop appropriate mitigation strategies. Option D. Expedite the development and launch process to capture market advantage, with a plan to address any identified risks reactively as they emerge. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates all potential operational, financial, compliance, and reputational risks, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in risk assessment by requiring the evaluation of a new service offering's potential impact on Japan Post Holdings' existing operational framework and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and market opportunity with the imperative to maintain robust risk management practices that align with Japanese financial regulations and postal service operational standards. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to identify potential threats, assess their likelihood and impact, and develop appropriate mitigation strategies before launching the service. This requires a deep understanding of both the business context and the relevant regulatory landscape. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment process that begins with identifying all potential risks associated with the new service. This includes operational risks, e.g., system failures, service disruption, financial risks, e.g., unexpected costs, revenue shortfall, compliance risks, e.g., breaches of postal regulations, data privacy laws, reputational risks, e.g., negative customer feedback, public perception, and strategic risks, e.g., misalignment with company objectives. Following identification, each risk must be analyzed for its likelihood and potential impact, and then evaluated to determine the overall risk exposure. Mitigation strategies, controls, and contingency plans should then be developed and implemented. This structured approach ensures that all facets of risk are considered, aligning with the principles of sound corporate governance and regulatory compliance expected of entities operating under Japanese postal and financial sector oversight. It prioritizes proactive identification and management, which is a cornerstone of responsible business conduct and regulatory adherence. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on the potential revenue generation of the new service without a commensurate assessment of associated risks represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the fundamental duty to manage the company's affairs prudently and to protect stakeholders, including customers and the public, from potential harm. It can lead to unforeseen operational disruptions, financial losses, and breaches of regulatory requirements, such as those pertaining to service reliability and customer data protection under Japanese law. Prioritizing the speed of market entry over a thorough risk evaluation is also a critical failure. While market agility is important, rushing a new service without adequate risk assessment can expose Japan Post Holdings to significant liabilities. This disregard for due diligence can result in non-compliance with regulations governing postal services and financial operations, potentially leading to penalties, reputational damage, and loss of public trust. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to responsible business practices and regulatory adherence. Adopting a wait-and-see approach, where risks are only addressed after they materialize, is fundamentally contrary to effective risk management and regulatory expectations. This reactive stance is highly problematic as it allows potential harm to occur before any mitigation is considered. It can lead to severe consequences, including service failures, financial instability, and significant breaches of legal and ethical obligations, all of which are unacceptable under the stringent oversight applicable to Japan Post Holdings. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first establishing a clear understanding of the business objectives and the operational environment. This involves engaging with all relevant stakeholders to identify potential risks from diverse perspectives. A structured risk assessment framework, such as ISO 31000 principles adapted to the Japanese regulatory context, should be employed. This framework typically involves risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk treatment, and monitoring and review. Decision-making should be guided by a principle of proportionality, ensuring that the resources allocated to risk management are commensurate with the potential impact of the risks. Furthermore, a culture of risk awareness and continuous improvement should be fostered throughout the organization, encouraging proactive reporting and learning from both successes and failures. This systematic and proactive approach ensures that new initiatives are launched responsibly, safeguarding the company's integrity and compliance. Question 16. Analysis of how Japan Post Holdings should best approach the assessment of operational risks associated with its diverse business segments, including postal delivery, logistics, and financial services, to ensure compliance with Japanese regulatory frameworks and maintain service integrity. Option A. Conducting informal discussions with department heads to gather anecdotal evidence of potential risks without a structured framework for analysis. Option B. Concentrating risk assessment efforts on risks that have the highest probability of occurring, even if their potential impact is minor. Option C. Primarily relying on historical incident data to identify recurring operational issues and focusing mitigation efforts on the most frequently occurring problems. Option D. Systematically identifying potential operational disruptions, assessing their likelihood and potential impact across all business segments, and prioritizing mitigation efforts based on this analysis. Correct answer is D. Systematically identifying potential operational disruptions, assessing their likelihood and potential impact across all business segments, and prioritizing mitigation efforts based on this analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment within the specific context of Japan Post Holdings operations, which are subject to Japanese financial regulations and postal service laws. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate method for assessing operational risks, considering the unique nature of postal services, logistics, and financial operations that Japan Post Holdings oversees. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both comprehensive and practical, aligning with regulatory expectations for robust risk management. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a systematic and forward-looking evaluation of potential disruptions. This aligns with the principles of proactive risk management mandated by Japanese financial regulators and the specific oversight bodies for postal services. By focusing on the likelihood and impact of identified risks and considering the interconnectedness of various operational facets, this approach ensures that potential vulnerabilities are understood and can be mitigated effectively before they materialize. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining service continuity, financial stability, and public trust, all of which are paramount for an entity like Japan Post Holdings. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging threats would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet regulatory expectations for forward-looking risk assessment, as it ignores potential future disruptions that may not have a historical precedent. Such an approach could lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization exposed to unforeseen events. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most frequent risks, regardless of their potential impact, is also professionally unacceptable. While frequency is a factor, regulatory frameworks and sound risk management principles demand consideration of both likelihood and severity. Ignoring high-impact, low-frequency risks can lead to catastrophic consequences that outweigh the cost of mitigation. Finally, an approach that relies on subjective opinions without any structured data or analytical framework would be professionally unacceptable. This lacks the objectivity and rigor required by regulators and undermines the credibility of the risk assessment process. It fails to provide a consistent and defensible basis for risk mitigation strategies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the scope of the risk assessment, considering all relevant operational areas of Japan Post Holdings. 2. Identifying potential risks through a combination of historical analysis, expert judgment, and scenario planning. 3. Evaluating each identified risk based on its likelihood of occurrence and its potential impact on operations, finances, and reputation. 4. Prioritizing risks based on their assessed severity. 5. Developing and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment to reflect changing internal and external environments. Question 17. The audit findings indicate that, while Japan Post Holdings has a robust framework for assessing traditional financial and operational risks, the process for identifying and evaluating emerging digital threats, such as advanced cyber attacks and data privacy breaches, may not be sufficiently integrated or forward-looking. Which of the following approaches would best enhance the organization's risk assessment capabilities in this area? Option A. Defer the assessment of emerging digital risks until a specific incident has occurred, at which point a dedicated task force can be assembled to address it. Option B. Continue to rely primarily on historical incident data to inform risk assessments, as this provides a proven basis for understanding potential threats. Option C. Systematically incorporate a forward-looking component into the existing risk assessment methodology, specifically designed to identify and analyze potential emerging digital risks and their impact, using scenario planning and expert judgment. Option D. Address emerging digital risks through a series of independent, ad hoc initiatives managed by individual departments, rather than integrating them into the central risk assessment framework. The correct answer is C. Systematically incorporate a forward-looking component into the existing risk assessment methodology, specifically designed to identify and analyze potential emerging digital risks and their impact, using scenario planning and expert judgment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the audit findings highlight a potential gap in Japan Post Holdings' risk assessment framework, specifically concerning the integration of emerging digital risks. The challenge lies in determining the most appropriate method to enhance the existing risk assessment process to proactively address these new threats, rather than merely reacting to them. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective in identifying and mitigating these risks, and compliant with relevant Japanese financial regulations and internal governance policies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it advocates for a forward-looking, systematic integration of emerging risks into the established risk assessment methodology. This aligns with the principles of robust corporate governance and risk management expected of a major financial institution like Japan Post Holdings. By proactively identifying potential digital threats and their impact, the organization can develop appropriate mitigation strategies before they materialize into significant operational or financial losses. This proactive stance is crucial in the rapidly evolving digital landscape and is implicitly supported by the general principles of risk management and internal control frameworks prevalent in regulated financial sectors in Japan, which emphasize continuous improvement and adaptation to new threats. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data for risk assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This is because emerging digital risks, by their very nature, may not have a significant historical precedent. Relying only on past incidents would lead to a failure to identify and prepare for novel threats, thereby creating a blind spot in the organization's risk management. This would contravene the ethical obligation to maintain a comprehensive and up-to-date risk profile, and could lead to regulatory scrutiny for inadequate risk oversight. Another incorrect approach that suggests deferring the assessment of emerging digital risks until a specific incident occurs is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive stance represents a significant failure in risk management. It implies a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential impact of these risks. Such an approach would likely violate internal policies requiring proactive risk identification and could be seen as a breach of the duty of care owed to stakeholders, potentially leading to severe financial and reputational damage. Furthermore, an approach that proposes to address emerging digital risks through ad hoc, uncoordinated initiatives rather than integrating them into the formal risk assessment framework is professionally unsound. This fragmented approach lacks the systematic rigor necessary for effective risk management. It can lead to duplicated efforts, missed risks, and an inability to prioritize mitigation actions effectively. This would fall short of the comprehensive and integrated risk management system expected under Japanese financial regulations, which emphasize a holistic view of risks across the organization. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the organization's current risk assessment framework, its strategic objectives, and the evolving threat landscape. Professionals should consult relevant internal policies, industry best practices, and any applicable regulatory guidance. The process should involve a critical evaluation of proposed approaches against the criteria of proactivity, comprehensiveness, integration, and effectiveness in mitigating identified risks. Collaboration with relevant departments, such as IT security and compliance, is essential to ensure a well-rounded assessment and the selection of the most robust and compliant solution. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that, while recent delivery performance metrics for Japan Post Holdings have been strong, there are emerging concerns regarding the aging infrastructure of the primary sorting facilities and an increasing reliance on manual processes in certain regional hubs. Considering the regulatory framework governing postal services in Japan, which of the following approaches to risk assessment would be most appropriate? Option A. Prioritize the risk assessment on recent positive performance data to confirm the current operational model's effectiveness and assume that infrastructure and process issues are minor and will resolve themselves. Option B. Focus the risk assessment primarily on identifying opportunities for immediate cost reduction by streamlining operations and potentially reducing staffing levels at the identified regional hubs. Option C. Allocate resources to address only those risks that have already materialized into service disruptions or customer complaints, as these represent the most tangible threats. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates the potential impact of infrastructure failure and manual process inefficiencies on service continuity, regulatory compliance, and customer satisfaction, and develop mitigation strategies accordingly. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates the potential impact of infrastructure failure and manual process inefficiencies on service continuity, regulatory compliance, and customer satisfaction, and develop mitigation strategies accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in risk assessment by requiring the identification of potential operational vulnerabilities within Japan Post Holdings, a large and complex organization. The difficulty lies in moving beyond superficial observations to pinpoint specific, actionable risks that could impact service delivery, financial stability, or regulatory compliance. A thorough risk assessment demands an understanding of the interconnectedness of various operational functions and the potential for cascading failures. The professional challenge is to distinguish between minor inconveniences and significant threats that warrant immediate attention and mitigation strategies, all within the context of Japan's specific regulatory environment for postal and logistics services. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves systematically identifying and evaluating potential risks by considering the likelihood of their occurrence and their potential impact on Japan Post Holdings' operations, reputation, and compliance with relevant Japanese laws and regulations. This aligns with best professional practice by adopting a structured and comprehensive methodology. Specifically, it necessitates an understanding of the Postal Services Act and related guidelines, which mandate robust risk management frameworks to ensure the reliable and secure delivery of mail and parcels. This approach prioritizes proactive identification and assessment, enabling the development of targeted mitigation strategies before incidents occur, thereby safeguarding the company's operational integrity and public trust. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on recent positive performance metrics without a forward-looking risk perspective is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Japanese regulations, particularly those governing essential services like postal operations, require a proactive approach to risk management, not just a review of past successes. This oversight can lead to complacency and an inability to anticipate emerging threats. Prioritizing the immediate cost savings of reducing staff without a thorough assessment of the impact on service quality and operational capacity is also a failure. Such a decision could violate service-level agreements mandated by regulatory bodies and compromise the company's ability to meet its statutory obligations, potentially leading to penalties and reputational damage. Ignoring potential cybersecurity threats because the current system appears to be functioning adequately represents a critical failure to adhere to modern risk assessment standards and potential regulatory expectations regarding data protection and system resilience. The dynamic nature of cyber threats means that a functioning system today could be vulnerable tomorrow, and regulatory bodies expect robust defenses and contingency plans. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first understanding the specific regulatory landscape governing Japan Post Holdings, including the Postal Services Act and any relevant directives from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. This involves identifying key operational areas, such as mail sorting, delivery networks, IT infrastructure, and customer service. For each area, potential risks should be brainstormed, considering internal factors, e.g., system failures, human error, and external factors, e.g., natural disasters, cyber attacks, regulatory changes. The likelihood and impact of each identified risk should then be assessed, using a qualitative or quantitative framework as appropriate. This assessment should inform the prioritization of risks and the development of mitigation plans, which should be regularly reviewed and updated. The decision-making process should always be guided by the principle of ensuring the continuity and integrity of essential postal services, while adhering to all legal and ethical obligations. Question 19. Research into the introduction of a new digital payment service by Japan Post Holdings reveals a need for a robust risk assessment. Considering the company's extensive customer base and its obligations under Japanese financial and postal regulations, which of the following approaches best ensures the responsible and compliant launch of this service? Option A. Implement a risk assessment methodology that is generic and not specifically tailored to the unique operational context and regulatory requirements of Japan Post Holdings within the Japanese market. Option B. Prioritize the speed of market entry by conducting a high-level risk assessment, focusing primarily on the potential revenue streams and assuming that existing general risk management frameworks will suffice. Option C. Focus the risk assessment predominantly on the potential revenue generation and market share gains of the new digital payment service, with minimal attention paid to potential downsides or regulatory compliance. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential operational, financial, compliance, and reputational risks, with specific consideration for relevant Japanese laws, such as the Payment Services Act and privacy regulations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential operational, financial, compliance, and reputational risks, with specific consideration for relevant Japanese laws such as the Payment Services Act and privacy regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in risk assessment by requiring the evaluation of a new service offering's potential impact on Japan Post Holdings' existing operational framework and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing innovation and market expansion with the imperative to maintain robust risk management practices that align with the specific regulatory environment governing postal and financial services in Japan. A hasty or incomplete assessment could lead to significant financial, reputational, and legal repercussions, particularly given the sensitive nature of data handled by Japan Post. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks associated with the new digital payment service. This includes considering operational risks, e.g., system failures, data breaches, financial risks, e.g., fraud, money laundering, compliance risks, e.g., violations of the Payment Services Act, Financial Instruments and Exchange Act, and relevant privacy laws, and reputational risks. This approach is best professional practice because it adheres to the principles of prudent risk management mandated by Japanese financial and postal regulatory bodies. It ensures that potential threats are understood and mitigated before launch, thereby safeguarding customer trust, regulatory standing, and the company's financial health. This aligns with the spirit of continuous improvement and due diligence expected of entities operating within Japan's regulated financial sector. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the potential revenue generation of the new service without a thorough risk assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the fundamental responsibility to protect customers and the integrity of the financial system, potentially leading to violations of consumer protection laws and anti-money laundering regulations. Prioritizing the speed of market entry over the depth of the risk assessment is also a critical failure. This haste can result in overlooking crucial vulnerabilities, such as inadequate cybersecurity measures or insufficient fraud detection mechanisms, which could expose Japan Post Holdings to substantial losses and regulatory penalties under Japanese law. Adopting a risk assessment methodology that is generic and not tailored to the specific regulatory requirements and operational context of Japan Post Holdings is another failure. This could lead to the omission of critical risk factors relevant to the Japanese market, such as specific anti-terrorism, financing regulations, or unique consumer protection nuances, thereby failing to meet compliance obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured and iterative risk assessment process. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all potential risk categories relevant to the specific service and operating environment, analyzing the likelihood and impact of each identified risk, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Regular review and updates to the risk assessment are crucial, especially as the service evolves or the regulatory landscape changes. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and aligned with the organization's risk appetite and strategic objectives. Question 20. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in delivery times for rural areas and a corresponding rise in customer complaints regarding delayed mail, alongside a departmental push for cost savings through route optimization. Which approach best balances operational efficiency with the regulatory and ethical obligations of Japan Post Holdings? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the route optimization algorithms and consult with delivery staff in rural areas to identify specific logistical challenges and potential adjustments, while also analyzing customer feedback to understand the nature of the delays and complaints. Option B. Focus solely on increasing the speed of delivery in urban areas to offset the slower times in rural regions, without investigating the root causes of the rural delays. Option C. Immediately implement further route optimizations to maximize cost savings, assuming that any increase in delivery times is an acceptable trade-off for improved financial performance. Option D. Prioritize meeting the cost-saving targets by reducing the frequency of deliveries in rural areas, even if it leads to longer wait times for customers. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the route optimization algorithms and consult with delivery staff in rural areas to identify specific logistical challenges and potential adjustments, while also analyzing customer feedback to understand the nature of the delays and complaints. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the fundamental principles of customer service and regulatory compliance within the context of Japan Post Holdings operations. The pressure to improve performance metrics, such as delivery times and cost reduction, can inadvertently lead to decisions that compromise the quality of service or overlook potential risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of customer trust, employee well-being, or adherence to the specific regulations governing postal services in Japan. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic review of performance metrics, considering both quantitative data and qualitative feedback. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation to provide reliable and accessible postal services, as mandated by the Postal Service Act of Japan and related regulations. By investigating the root causes of performance deviations and engaging with frontline staff, it demonstrates a commitment to understanding the practical implications of operational changes and fosters a culture of continuous improvement that is both effective and responsible. This proactive and empathetic stance ensures that any proposed solutions are sustainable and address the actual needs of customers and employees, thereby upholding the reputation and public trust in Japan Post Holdings. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without considering the impact on service quality would represent a regulatory and ethical failure. The Postal Service Act emphasizes the importance of providing universal postal services, and actions that significantly degrade service accessibility or reliability could be seen as a violation of this principle. Furthermore, implementing changes without consulting or adequately training frontline staff could lead to operational errors, decreased employee morale, and potential breaches of safety regulations, all of which are professionally unacceptable. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring customer complaints in favor of meeting numerical targets would be a direct ethical failure, undermining the core responsibility of a public service provider to its users and potentially violating consumer protection guidelines. Such an approach disregards the importance of customer satisfaction and feedback, which are crucial for maintaining public trust and ensuring the long-term viability of the postal service. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly analyze all available performance data, both quantitative and qualitative. Second, identify potential root causes for any observed deviations, considering operational, technological, and human factors. Third, engage with stakeholders, including frontline employees and customer representatives, to gather diverse perspectives and insights. Fourth, evaluate potential solutions against established regulatory requirements, ethical principles, and the organization's strategic objectives, prioritizing those that offer a balanced and sustainable outcome. Finally, implement chosen solutions with clear communication, adequate training, and ongoing monitoring to ensure effectiveness and compliance.